She was supposed to get married today. Instead, she was being dragged across a church floor by her hair while a room full of people laughed. That's the moment Aurora Hale understood. Nobody was coming to save her. Not her father, not her fiancé, not a single soul in that decorated chapel full of candlelight and cruelty. Nobody. Until the doors exploded off their hinges. If you've ever loved someone who didn't deserve it, stayed somewhere you should have left, or fought to survive when the world bet against you, this story is for you. Watch until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The snow started falling around 4 in the morning, which was the same hour Aurora Hale's life began coming apart at the seams. She was sitting in the back of a Greyhound bus with a cardboard coffee cup going cold in her hands and a duffel bag wedged between her boots and the seat in front of her. Outside the window, the highway stretched endlessly through dark farmland, flat and frozen and ugly under a sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to storm or just threaten to. Christmas was 3 days away. She hadn't bought a single gift. She hadn't decorated anything. She hadn't done much of anything in the past several weeks except work double shifts at the Hargrove Mountain Hotel and send every spare dollar back to Millhaven, the small dying town in western Pennsylvania she'd been trying to escape for most of her adult life. The reason she was going back now was the same reason she'd been sending the money. Her mother was sick. Not sick like a bad winter cold or a manageable diagnosis with manageable medication. Sick like the kind of sick that required a phone call at 2 in the morning and a doctor's voice that didn't sugarcoat anything. Sick like the kind of sick that cost $140,000 to fix and gave you maybe 6 weeks to figure out where that money was coming from. Aurora didn't have $140,000. She had $1,100 in a checking account and a pair of boots with a split in the left sole that let the cold in every time she stepped in a puddle. But she had Rowan. She kept reminding herself of that. She had Rowan Mercer, her fiancé of 2 years, the man she'd grown up knowing and eventually loved in the patient, weathered way that people love things they've had their whole lives, like a particular road or a particular season. Rowan had money. His family had been in property development for 3 generations. He wasn't rich the way rich people in movies were rich, but he was stable, and stability had always felt more valuable to Aurora than extravagance. She'd called him from a payphone outside the bus station because her cell had died, and she hadn't thought to bring a charger. She told him about her mother. She told him about the surgery. She told him the number, 140, and there was a pause on the line that lasted maybe 4 seconds too long before he said, "I hear you, Rory. Just get home. We'll figure it out together." Together. She'd held on to that word the entire ride. The bus pulled into Millhaven at 6:47 in the morning. The town looked exactly the way she'd left it, gray and quiet and slightly defeated, like a place that had once expected more from itself. The diner on Caldwell Street had a new coat of paint. The hardware store was boarded up. The Christmas lights strung along Main Street were missing a third of their bulbs, and the ones that still worked blinked in an irregular rhythm that was more anxious than festive. Aurora pulled her coat tighter, picked up her duffel, and walked the 6 blocks to her mother's house because the cab she called didn't show up, and she wasn't about to wait. Margaret Hale was 54 years old and looked 70. She was sitting up in bed when Aurora arrived, which was either a good sign or the kind of false energy sick people sometimes produced right before they crashed. Her hair had thinned since September. Her wrists looked like sticks wrapped in paper, but her eyes were the same, steady and dark and proud. And she smiled when Aurora pushed through the bedroom door, and that smile was worth the 8-hour bus ride and the split boot and the cold coffee and all of it. "You didn't have to come," her mother said. "Stop talking," Aurora said, and sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand, and neither of them said anything for a while. Her stepmother, Diane, appeared in the doorway about 20 minutes later with a mug of tea she set on the nightstand without offering it to Aurora. Diane had married Aurora's father, Gerald, when Aurora was 12 years old, and in the 16 years since, she had never once done anything that could be mistaken for warmth. She was thin and angular and precise in her cruelty, the kind of woman who said cutting things with a smile and then looked at you blankly if you reacted. "You look tired," Diane said to Aurora. "I've been traveling since midnight. Rowan called this morning. He wants to see you when you're settled." Aurora looked up. "He called here?" "He's coming for dinner." Diane's expression shifted. Just slightly, just a flicker. in a way Aurora couldn't read. Your father wants to talk to you too, about the surgery, about the arrangements. What arrangements? Dinner, Diane said, and disappeared back down the hallway. Aurora sat with her mother until Margaret fell asleep again around noon. Then she went downstairs and ate a piece of bread standing at the kitchen counter because she was too tired to make anything real and too stubborn to ask Diane for help. Her father came home at 2 in the afternoon smelling like cigarettes and something else, something tense and chemical, the smell of a man running on anxiety and bad decisions. Gerald Hale had once been handsome in a rough, ordinary way. Now he just looked used up. He hugged Aurora too briefly and wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "Good you're home," he said. "How's the surgery looking?" "We're working on it." "Working on it how?" "The hospital said they need the deposit by the 28th. "I know what the hospital said." "Dad," Aurora. He said her name like it was a door closing. "We're working on it. Let me handle it." She let it go. She was too tired to push, and she figured Rowan would tell her more at dinner. She went upstairs and slept for 3 hours in her old bedroom, with its water-stained ceiling and its single window looking out at the dead backyard and the frozen creek beyond. She dreamed about nothing. When she woke up, it was dark outside, and she could hear voices downstairs. Her father's, Diane's, and one other that she didn't recognize. Not Rowan's. She came downstairs in the same jeans and sweater she'd arrived in, hair still creased from the pillow. Rowan was at the table, and across from him sat a man she'd never seen before. He was in his 50s, thick through the shoulders, with the soft, satisfied face of someone who had never been told no. He wore a gold watch that cost more than the house. He was looking at Aurora with an expression she didn't like before she'd even reached the bottom of the stairs. "Aurora," her father said, standing up too fast. "This is Clifton Bennett. He's a business associate." Bennett smiled. His teeth were very white and very even. "I've heard a lot about you." Aurora looked at her father. "What kind of business?" "Sit down," Diane said. "Dinner's getting cold." The dinner was strange in a way she couldn't name for the first 40 minutes. Too polished, too prepared, the conversation moving in loops that always bent back toward her. Bennett asked her questions that were too personal for a first meeting. What did she want out of life? Did she see herself in Millhaven long term? Had she ever thought about traveling? Rowan sat across from her and ate his food and said almost nothing. He wouldn't look at her directly. She kept catching him glancing sideways at her father. She put her fork down at the 45-minute mark. "What's happening?" she said. The table went quiet. "I want someone to tell me what's actually happening right now, because this doesn't feel like dinner. This feels like something else." Her father cleared his throat. "Aurora." "Gerald." Bennett set his wine glass down. "Let me." He turned to her with that same settled, comfortable smile. "Your family has a situation. Medical debt. Significant. The kind that doesn't resolve itself." He gestured lightly with one hand. "I have the means to make that problem disappear. Every cent of it. Your mother gets her surgery, her recovery, the best care available. The house gets taken care of. Your father's debts, and there are others, your daughter may not know the full scope, those get handled too." Aurora was very still. "And in exchange for what?" "You'd come with me." He said it the way you'd say you'd like another cup of coffee. Casual. Already decided. "We'd marry. You'd want for nothing. It's a practical arrangement." She looked at her father. He was looking at the tablecloth. "You're selling me," she said. "Aurora, you're selling me." She said it again because it needed to be said twice to be real. "For how much?" The silence was its own answer. 10 million, Diane said. Because, of course, it was Diane who said it. "He's paying 10 million for the arrangement. Your mother's surgery is covered. The house is covered. All of it." Aurora pushed back from the table. Her chair scraped against the floor. Rowan finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that broke something inside her chest. Not guilt, not shame. Calculation. The look of a man who had already run the numbers and made his peace with the outcome. "Rowan," she said. "Rory." His voice was careful, neutral. "It makes sense. Think about it. Think about what your mother needs. You knew." She heard her own voice like it was coming from somewhere outside her body. "You knew about this." "I couldn't cover the surgery. Not that kind of money. I tried to figure out another—" "Get out," she said. "Aurora, I said get out of this house. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she held herself straight. All of you get out of this house right now. Nobody moved. She walked out instead. She made it to the end of the driveway before she stopped, because it was 18 degrees and she'd come downstairs in socks and she had nowhere to go. The cold hit her like a physical thing, cutting through the sweater, finding the gaps at her wrists and collar. She stood at the end of the frozen driveway with her arms wrapped around herself and breathed, long, ragged, furious breaths that misted white in front of her face, and tried to think. Her mind kept snagging on the number. 10 million. Her father had put a number on her, a specific, negotiated, fully settled number. She didn't know how long she stood there. Long enough for her feet to go numb through the socks, long enough for the cold to work its way into her chest and make breathing hurt. She was still standing there when the black car rolled past. It was moving slowly, too slowly for the conditions, the engine almost silent, the headlights cutting clean white slices through the falling snow. A town car. Not a make or model you saw in Millhaven. It passed her completely, then stopped about 30 yards ahead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rear door opened. "You're going to lose those toes." The voice was low and unhurried and carried an accent she couldn't place. Not quite East Coast, not quite European, something in between that felt like it had been worn smooth by a long time spent in too many places. She couldn't see the face from where she was standing, just a figure in the open door, dark coat, dark shirt, the brief orange point of a cigarette being extinguished against the doorframe. "I'm fine," she said. "You're in your socks. In December." A pause. "You are not fine." She didn't answer. The figure stepped out of the car fully, and the snow and the streetlight gave her enough to see by. Tall. The kind of tall that changed the geometry of a space. Wide through the shoulders in a coat that was clearly expensive. Dark hair, a little long, pushed back from a face that was, she registered this in a detached, exhausted way, extraordinary. The kind of face that had been put together with care and then interrupted by violence. A scar along the left jaw, another cutting through the left eyebrow. 40, maybe. 42. Eyes that were so dark they looked black from where she was standing. He looked at her the way very few people had ever looked at her, like he was actually seeing her. "Get in the car," he said. "I'll take you somewhere warm." "I don't get into cars with strangers. My name is Valentino De Luca." He said it simply, without flourish. Now we're not strangers. The name meant nothing to her. She was from Millhaven, Pennsylvania. She worked hotel shifts and sent money home, and her world was defined by bus schedules and grocery prices, and her mother's declining lab results. She had no reference for that name or what it carried. "Still a stranger," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not irritation, but something closer to interest, like she'd done something unexpected. "What's your name?" "Aurora." "Aurora." He repeated it like he was taking inventory of it. "Are you in trouble, Aurora?" She laughed, a short, jagged sound with no humor in it. "What makes you ask that?" "You're standing in the snow in your socks at—" He glanced at something on his wrist. 9:47 at night in what appears to be a residential neighborhood with no intention of going back inside, and your face looks like someone just took something from you that didn't belong to them. She stared at him. He stared back. The snow came down between them, soft and indifferent. "I'm not getting in your car," she said. "Then I'll stand here," he said, and leaned against the car door with his arms crossed, perfectly at ease, perfectly patient, as if freezing temperatures were something that happened to other people. She went back inside because her feet were genuinely going numb. She put on her boots and her coat and came back out through the side door that opened onto the driveway, and when she came around the front of the house, the black car was still there. He was still standing against it. "You need a drive somewhere?" he said. "The hospital," she said, because it was the only place she could think of that made sense. Her mother was 2 floors up, and even if she couldn't do anything useful, she needed to be near something real. "Millhaven General." He opened the rear door without a word. She got in. She told herself it was because of the cold. The hospital was 12 minutes away. He sat in the front with his driver and said nothing for the first 8 minutes, which she was grateful for. She looked out the window at the dark town going past and tried to put herself back together. The anger had settled into something heavier. Not grief exactly, but the weight of having believed something for a long time and then having it removed without warning. At the fourth traffic light, he turned slightly in the seat. "Whatever happened tonight," he said, "it's survivable." "You don't know what happened tonight." "No." He turned back forward. "But I know that look." She wanted to ask him what look. She didn't. At the hospital, she thanked him without looking at him and got out and went through the sliding glass doors into the fluorescent warmth of the lobby. She didn't look back at the car. She went upstairs and sat in the chair beside her mother's bed and held her hand while Margaret slept, and the monitors beeped their steady, small reassurances, and she stayed there until 3 in the morning, when a nurse gently told her visiting hours had ended and she should go home and rest. She didn't go home. She walked to the all-night diner on Caldwell Street and ordered coffee. She didn't drink and sat in a corner booth until her phone charged enough to turn on. She'd found the charger jammed at the bottom of her duffel. And then she opened her banking app and looked at her balance for a long time. $1,143. Her next shift was 2 days away, in a hotel that was a 9-hour bus ride from here. She was staring at the number when the diner's bell chimed above the door. He came in out of the snow still wearing the same dark coat, and he didn't look around the diner the way people looked when they were searching. He looked at her directly, immediately, which meant he'd known she was here, or he was the kind of man who simply always found what he was looking for. He crossed the diner, pulled out the chair across from her without asking, and sat down. "Why are you following me?" she said. "I'm not." He signaled the waitress for coffee with 2 fingers. "I'm staying at the only hotel in this town that's still open, which happens to be 2 doors down. I saw your light through the window. You recognized me through a diner window at 3 in the morning. I have a good memory for faces." He settled back in the chair and looked at her with that same unnerving directness. "You didn't drink your coffee." "I don't want coffee. I just needed somewhere to sit." "Then sit." He pulled out his phone, looked at something briefly, put it away. "I'm not going to bother you." He didn't for almost 20 minutes. He drank his coffee. She watched him sideways and told herself she was just people watching, which was a lie, because there was nothing casual about the attention she was paying him. He was, and she was too exhausted and too raw to pretend otherwise, the most quietly commanding presence she'd ever been in proximity to. Not loud about it, not performing it, just present in a way that made everything adjacent to him feel less consequential. "My mother is dying," she said, because the silence had gotten too heavy, and the words had been sitting in her chest all night wanting out. He looked up. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say anything for a moment. "What does she need?" he said. "A surgery she can't afford, that nobody in my family can afford unless they sell me to pay for it, which—" She stopped. Her voice had done something she didn't want it to do. She pressed her lips together, breathed through her nose, got it under control. "Which is apparently what my father decided to do." A silence. Then, "Someone made you an offer. Someone offered to buy me for $10 million. My father agreed." She picked up her coffee cup, set it back down. "My fiancé knew about it and didn't tell me." Valentino De Luca said nothing. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, something careful and measured, and beneath that something else, something that had sharpened and gone very still. "What's the surgery cost?" he said. "Why?" "I'm asking." $140,000. He reached into his coat, pulled out a phone, typed something. "What hospital?" "Why are you—" She leaned forward. "What are you doing?" "Making a call." He looked up. "What hospital, Aurora?" "Millhaven General. But you're not paying for my mother's surgery. I don't know you. You don't know me. People don't just—" "I do." He said it the way you stated facts. Not arrogant, factual. Like the sky being gray or the diner being warm. "I do things that need doing. The money is irrelevant to me. Your mother's surgery is not irrelevant to you. So—" She stared at him. He held her gaze without any particular effort. "What do you want in exchange?" she said. "Nothing. People always want something." "Then consider it an exception." He went back to his phone. "What's your mother's name?" She should have said no. She should have gotten up and walked back to her father's house and figured something else out. She should have done a lot of things. Instead, she sat in the corner booth of the only all-night diner in Millhaven, Pennsylvania, at 3:40 in the morning on the 22nd of December, and she told a stranger her mother's name. She didn't understand yet what she'd started. He was gone in the morning, not just from the diner, from the hotel, from the town. She went by the hotel out of an impulse she didn't fully examine, and the woman at the desk told her the guest in room 12 had checked out at 5 a.m. Aurora stood at the desk for a moment, feeling something she couldn't name. Relief, probably. She was relieved. That was the reasonable thing to feel. Her phone rang while she was walking back. It was the hospital, not the billing department, the head of cardiothoracic surgery's office, a woman named Dr. Ingrid Sato, who told Aurora in a measured and professional voice that the payment for her mother's procedure had been received in full that morning, along with a deposit for post-operative care, and that they were scheduling the surgery for the 27th, and could she please come in to complete the consent forms at her earliest convenience. Aurora stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk. "How much was the payment?" she said. Dr. Sato told her. It was not $140,000. It was more than twice that, enough to cover the surgery, the recovery, the follow-up care, and a private room for 6 weeks. Aurora stood on the sidewalk in the snow and didn't breathe for a moment. Then she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She cried. Not beautifully, ugly, shaking, gasping crying, the kind that wasn't about one thing but about everything at once, the whole accumulated weight of the last several months releasing through the narrow opening of this single fact. Her mother was going to live. She cried for 4 minutes. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand, straightened her spine, and started walking back to her father's house. She had things to say. Opichi. Gerald and Diane were at the kitchen table when she came in, and Bennett was there too, which she hadn't expected. He was eating toast with the comfortable ease of a man who had made himself at home. Her father looked up with the particular expression of a man waiting for either a surrender or an explosion. Aurora set her phone on the table. On the screen was the email from Millhaven General confirming the payment. "My mother's surgery is paid for," she said. The silence that followed had a specific texture. Confusion. Recalculation. Bennett's eyes went from the phone to her face. "Someone paid for it this morning," she said, "which means your $10 million, Mr. Bennett, buys you nothing. My mother doesn't need it, I don't need it, and I don't need to go anywhere with you." Bennett put down his toast. His pleasant expression hadn't changed, but the eyes above it had gone flat and hard. "Who paid for it?" "That's not your business." "It's entirely my business. Your father and I had an arrangement." "My father had an arrangement." She looked at Gerald. "Not me." "You never had my agreement. You made a deal about a person without that person's consent, which means—" She was keeping her voice steady through will alone. "It's not a deal. It's nothing. It's you deciding you own something you never owned." Gerald stood up. "Aurora. Aurora, the situation is more complicated than—" "You sold me," she said it quietly, "for $10 million to a man I'd never met, on Christmas." She picked up her phone. "I want you to understand that I will never forget that. And I need you to understand that the only reason I'm not walking out of this town right now and never coming back is because Mom is upstairs, and she needs someone here who actually gives a damn about her." She went upstairs. The next 4 days were a siege she endured through teeth-gritted practicality. She moved through the house like she was navigating a minefield, careful, deliberate, making herself small in the spaces where Diane and her father occupied, spending as many of her hours as possible at the hospital or in her mother's room. Bennett came back once. She left through the back door and walked around the block until his car was gone. Rowan called twice. She didn't answer. She was at the hospital on Christmas Eve when a bouquet of flowers arrived at the nurse's station. Deep red, probably $200 worth, with a card that had her name on it. She opened it. 3 words in handwriting that was precise and a little angular. "Merry Christmas, Aurora." No signature. She didn't need one. She sat with the card for a long time. Then she did something impulsive and probably stupid. She texted the number she'd been ignoring for 4 days. Not Rowan, the other one, the one he'd written on the back of a receipt at the diner in case she needed anything. She wrote, "Thank you for the flowers. And for everything else. You didn't have to." The reply came in 30 seconds. "I know. How is she?" "Better. Surgery's in 3 days. Good. A pause. Then, are you all right? She looked around the empty hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights, the linoleum, the sound of a television somewhere down the hall playing Christmas music. She thought about her answer for a long time. I will be, she finally wrote. Yes, he wrote back. You will. She didn't know what to do with that, so she put the phone in her pocket and went back to her mother's room. The surgery happened on the 27th. Aurora sat in the waiting room for 6 hours and 20 minutes, drinking bad coffee and reading the same 3 pages of a magazine over and over without absorbing any of it. Her father was there too, in a chair across the room. They didn't speak. Diane hadn't come. Rowan hadn't come. Nobody else had come. Just Aurora and Gerald sitting in the same room like people who shared a language but had forgotten how to use it with each other. Dr. Sato came out at 4:14 in the afternoon. She was smiling, the particular small, professional smile that Aurora had learned to read as the genuine one, not the practiced one. The surgery went very well, she said. Aurora bent forward in her chair and put her face in her hands and breathed. Gerald cried, which surprised her. She looked over at him, this man who had tried to sell her like property, who was crying in a waiting room chair with his elbows on his knees and his face crumpling. And she felt something that wasn't forgiveness, but was perhaps the first distant ancestor of it. Not now, not soon, but somewhere in the future, possibly. She texted the number again. She made it through. His response, of course she did. And then, there's something I need to ask you. She stared at the screen. Her mother was alive. Her mother was going to be okay. The surgery was done, the bills were paid, the worst of the worst had been survived. She was sitting in a hospital waiting room with bad lighting and a half-eaten vending machine sandwich, and she was going to be all right. What is it? She typed. His response came in 2 parts. First, have dinner with me. Then before she could answer, Millhaven has exactly 1 restaurant still open at this hour. I'll be there at 7. Come or don't. No obligation. Aurora put the phone in her pocket. She looked at the door to the recovery wing where her mother was waking up somewhere, confused and post-surgical and alive. She had every reason to say no. 100 reasons. The strangeness of it, the speed of it, the complete absence of any framework that made it sensible. She didn't know this man. She didn't know where he came from, who he was, why he'd spent an enormous sum of money on a woman he'd met in the snow outside a house that wasn't even a house she belonged to. She had every reason to say no. She was at the restaurant at 6:53. He was already there. He stood when she came in, which was a small thing that landed with unexpected weight. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had stood when she came into a room. He looked different in the restaurant light than he had in the snow or the diner at 3 in the morning, more defined, sharper in the particulars. The scar along his jaw caught the light, and she noticed a second one she'd missed before, at the corner of his right eye. He was, and she acknowledged this to herself with the resigned honesty of someone too tired for pretense, extraordinarily beautiful. In the way sharp things were beautiful. In the way things that could cut you still caught the light. You came, he said. I'm here for the food, she said. Their chicken is actually decent. He smiled. She felt it in her sternum, which she noted and filed away as information she wasn't prepared to act on. They ate. They talked. Not about what she expected. Not the money. Not her family. Not the arrangement he'd derailed. He asked about her mother. She told him, briefly, about Margaret's stubbornness and her laugh and the way she'd grown herbs on the kitchen windowsill every winter for as long as Aurora could remember. He listened the way very few people listened, with full attention, no performance of it. She found herself saying more than she intended to. Halfway through dinner, she asked him where he was from. He named a city. Originally, he said, and now? Everywhere. He turned his wine glass slowly. I travel for work. What kind of work? A pause, brief, but there. Finance, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. You're lying, she said. Something crossed his face. Surprise, quickly controlled. And beneath that, something almost like pleasure. Am I? The way you said it. You hesitated. Perceptive. What do you actually do? He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, I manage interests, multiple. Not all of them the kind you discuss in restaurants. She absorbed this. Should I be afraid of you? Probably. He said it without blinking. But you're not. She thought about this. No, she said. I'm not. Why? Because you paid for my mother's surgery, she said. People don't spend that kind of money to harm someone they've never met. Some do. You didn't. She picked up her fork. So, whatever else you are, you're not that. He studied her with that specific expression, the one she'd first noticed at the diner, the one that felt like being seen by something very old and very patient. Aurora, he said. What? I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to understand that it's a serious question, not a joke, not a gesture. He set down his own fork. I need a wife. The restaurant sounds continued around them, clinking, murmuring, the distant sound of a television at the bar. Excuse me, she said. An arrangement. A marriage that is mutually beneficial. You need protection from your father, from Bennett, from the kind of poverty that will drag you back here every few years for the rest of your life. I need someone I can trust. Someone who doesn't want something from me in a way that compromises me. He paused. I've been looking for a specific kind of person for a specific kind of arrangement, and in 2 days in this town, I have not encountered a single person who comes close except you. You've known me for 2 days. I'm aware of that. You don't know anything about me. I know you went back inside a house you should have walked away from because your mother needed someone nearby. I know you chose the worst coffee in Millhaven to cry in a diner booth at 3 in the morning rather than break down in front of people who'd already disappointed you. I know you texted me thank you before you texted anyone else. He held her gaze. I know enough. Aurora put down her fork. She breathed. The chicken was cold now, and she didn't care. I'm already engaged, she said, to a man who watched someone offer to buy you and said nothing. She had nothing to say to that. Think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. Think about it. He reached into his coat and set a card on the table. I'm here through the 30th. After that, I won't ask again. She looked at the card. She didn't pick it up. I'll walk myself home, she said, and stood up. He didn't stop her. He didn't follow. She walked out into the Christmas Eve cold with her coat buttoned wrong because she'd done it too fast. And she walked the 6 blocks back to her father's house with the snow coming down around her and her chest full of something she didn't have a name for. She didn't think about Rowan once the entire walk. That frightened her more than anything else had. The 30th came faster than it should have. Her mother was recovering. Slowly, carefully, the way Margaret did everything. With the stubborn dignity of a woman who had never asked anyone for more than what was reasonable. Aurora spent the days at the hospital and the nights in her old bedroom, and she did not call Rowan, and she did not contact Valentino, and she told herself she was fine with that. She was moving toward a decision by a process of stillness, the way silt settled to the bottom of still water. The morning of the 30th, she got a text from a number she didn't recognize. It had a photograph attached. She opened the photograph. It was a document, a legal document, from a firm she didn't recognize with her name on it, and beneath her name, a sum, not 140,000, something much larger. The text beneath the photograph said, "Your father's other debts, the ones he didn't tell you about. Bennett holds the notes. You have 48 hours before he calls them." She read it twice. Her hands were very still. She called the number. He answered on the second ring. "You knew," she said. "I found out this morning. My father owes Bennett money. Significant money. Bennett planned this from the beginning. The dinner, the offer, the deadline. If you refuse him, he calls your father's debts. The house is collateral. Your mother loses her home while she's still recovering." Aurora sat on the edge of her bed. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, snow was falling again. "What do I do?" she said, and hated herself for asking, but asked anyway. A pause. "There's a flight out of Pittsburgh at 2 this afternoon," he said. "My plane. I can have a car there in 40 minutes. You want me to run away with you? I want you to come with me," he said. "There's a difference." "There might not be. Aurora." His voice was different. Not softer exactly, but stripped of the careful distance he usually maintained, more direct.
Bennett is not a safe person. I know the kind of man he is better than you do. If you're here when he moves on your father's debt, I'm not afraid of him. I know you're not. That's part of the problem. Another pause. I can make this go away. All of it. Bennett's notes, your father's debts, every piece of it. But I need you to get on the plane.
The snow came down outside. Her mother was 2 miles away, sleeping in a hospital bed, alive because of this man. You're still asking me to marry you, she said. Yes? I haven't said yes. I know. Getting on the plane isn't saying yes. I know that too. She looked at the card he'd left on the restaurant table. She'd picked it up on the walk home, though she hadn't told herself she was going to. It had been sitting on the nightstand for 8 days. 40 minutes, she said. The car will be there in 35. She hung up. She looked around the room, the water-stained ceiling, the dead backyard, the frozen creek, the place where she'd grown up surviving. She pulled her duffel bag out from under the bed and started to pack. She was almost done when her phone rang. Not Valentino's number. A local number she almost didn't answer. It was Rowan. I need to talk to you, he said. His voice was strange, urgent in a way she'd never heard from him. Before you do something you can't take back, I need to tell you something about that man, about DeLuca, about who he actually is. Her hand tightened around the phone. What? She said. Not on the phone. In person. Come to the church on Hartwell Road. A pause. I know you're leaving. I can see the car on the way. Just 30 minutes, Rory. Give me 30 minutes. I need to show you something about what you're getting yourself into. She stood in the middle of her childhood bedroom with her half-packed duffel at her feet and the phone at her ear, and 35 minutes before a car arrived to take her to a plane. And the boy she'd trusted most of her life was on the other end of the line, telling her to stop. She looked at the nightstand, at the card, at the window, where the snow was still falling. She went to the church. The church on Hartwell Road was not a place Aurora had ever spent much time. It was old, older than most of the town, built from dark stone that had gone almost black with age and weather, set back from the road behind a row of bare oak trees whose branches crossed overhead like fingers interlocked. The parking lot was empty except for Rowan's truck, a beat-up gray F-150 she'd ridden in 100 times. The passenger seat still wearing the crack in the vinyl she'd put there with her house key 3 summers ago when she was digging for her phone. She parked the cab, she'd called one, not wanting to ask her father for the car, and told the driver to wait. He gave her a look that said he wasn't going to wait forever, and she said 10 minutes and got out. The cold hit her immediately. It was sharper here than in town, the wind moving through the oak trees without anything to stop it, carrying the particular bite of late December in the hills. Her breath came out in white bursts. The duffel was still in the cab. She'd left it there deliberately, which told her something about how much she trusted this. Rowan was inside the entry, not the main hall, standing in the small vestibule between the outer and inner doors with his coat still on and his hands shoved in his pockets. He looked rough, hadn't shaved in days. Eyes that were red at the corners in a way that could have been cold air or sleeplessness or something else entirely. He looked at her when she pushed through the outer door, and something crossed his face. Relief, she thought, and then something underneath that she couldn't pin down immediately. You actually came, he said. I said I would. You've got 10 minutes, Rowan. You're really leaving. 9 minutes and 50 seconds. He exhaled, ran a hand through his hair, the gesture she'd known since they were 17, the one he made when he was stalling. I need you to understand something before you go. About DeLuca. Then say it. He's not... He stopped, tried again. Do you know who he is? Actually, who he is? He told me he's in finance. Rowan laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. Finance, yeah. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She recognized it as a printed web page, the kind of thing you found at 2 in the morning when you were desperate and Googling names. He held it out. She looked at it without taking it. The headline was in Italian. She didn't read Italian, but the photograph below the text, black and white, clearly from a news archive, a crime scene, police tape, several official-looking men standing outside a building with blown-out windows, was legible in any language. Beneath the photograph, a name, DeLuca. What is this? She said.
That's from a Milan newspaper 3 years ago. 14 people died in that building. Rowan's voice had dropped, gone flat and deliberate. The building was traced to a holding company that was traced to another holding company that was traced to a man who has never once been charged with anything because the witnesses keep disappearing. He tapped the paper. That's your finance guy. Aurora was quiet. The wind rattled the outer door in its frame. You looked him up, she said. Of course I looked him up. The second you stopped answering my calls, I started making some. I talked to a guy I know who works fraud investigation in Pittsburgh. He knew the name immediately. Said the DeLuca family has run half the eastern seaboard since before we were born. Not run like business. Run like... He stopped. You know what I mean. Say it anyway. Organized crime, Aurora. The real kind. Not like movies, the kind where people who ask the wrong questions end up not asking any more questions. He was watching her with an intensity she hadn't seen from him in years. Desperate, almost angry. He spent $300,000 on your mother's surgery. That's pocket change to him. Do you understand what that means? It means he's bought you for less than it costs him to park his plane. She was still looking at the paper in his hand, the blown-out building, the police tape. Why didn't you tell me about Bennett? She said. Rowan blinked. What? The dinner, the arrangement. You sat there and you knew. She looked up at him. You knew my father had made a deal and you didn't say a word until it was already at the table. Why? That's not the point right now. It's exactly the point. You're standing here telling me I shouldn't trust a man I barely know, but I've known you my whole life, and you sat across from me at that dinner and you watched my father sell me and you didn't open your mouth. Her voice was steady. She'd needed it to be steady for this, and it was. So I need to understand why, before we talk about anything else. Rowan looked at the floor. The vestibule was very small. Their breath was visible between them. Bennett had money in my business, he said. The development company. He's been an investor for 2 years. If I'd blown up that dinner, he would have pulled his money. It wasn't just his money. He had documentation on some deals that weren't totally... He stopped, started again. I was in a corner. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like exactly what it is. But I thought if you agreed, if it was what you wanted to do to help your mother, then you thought I might actually agree. People make compromises, not that one. She stepped back, 1 step, but deliberate. Not that particular compromise, Rowan. Not ever. He was quiet. The fight went out of his eyes. What was left behind was something smaller and sadder and more honest, and she recognized it because she'd worn the same expression standing in her father's kitchen 4 days ago. The expression of a person who knew exactly who they were now that it mattered. I'm sorry, he said. And she believed him, actually. She believed he was sorry. It didn't change anything, but it was true. And truth was the minimum she owed him acknowledgement for. I know, she said. She reached over and took the printed paper from his hand. She looked at it for a moment. The blown-out building, the name, the grainy black and white of it all. Then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket. Thank you for showing me this, she said. Rowan stared at her. You're still going. My cab is running. Aurora. Did you hear what I just said? 14 people? He paid for my mother's surgery. She buttoned her top button. And when my father tried to sell me to a man who was planning to blackmail him from the beginning, DeLuca told me. He could have let Bennett spring that trap and used it to push me. He didn't. He gave me the information and told me I had a choice. She looked at Rowan. That's more than you did. The outer door opened against the wind. She stepped through it. The cold wrapped around her immediately, thorough and impersonal. You're going to get hurt, Rowan called after her. She kept walking. He's going to destroy you. People like that, they don't keep people safe, they collect them. You're going to be another thing he owns. She got in the cab, closed the door. The driver looked at her in the rear view. Pittsburgh Airport, she said. Fast as you can. She put her hand in her coat pocket and felt the folded paper. She didn't unfold it again. She looked out the window at the town going past. The diner, the hardware store, the Christmas lights missing a third of their bulbs, and she breathed steadily, and she didn't let herself think about what Rowan had said. Not the specifics of it, because if she thought about the specifics, she would have to think about what she was doing,
and right now she needed to just be in motion. Her phone buzzed. A text from the same number. Car is 3 minutes out. She texted back. Already in a cab. Meet me at the gate. A pause. Then, you went somewhere first, not a question. I'll explain later, she typed. You don't have to. She stared at that for a moment, then put the phone away. The plane was not what she'd expected, which meant she hadn't known what to expect. A private terminal, a gate attendant who called her by name without being told, a plane that was not enormous but was the kind of quiet and deliberate that communicated money without announcing it. She'd never been on a private plane. She'd been on 3 commercial flights in her life, all of them middle seat. He was already on board when she came up the stairs, sitting in a leather seat with his coat still on, laptop open, a glass of water on the table. He looked up when she appeared and took in the duffel, the coat, her face, all of it in one brief sweep, and then went back to the laptop. There's food in the galley if you want it, he said. We leave in 10 minutes. She sat down across from him, put the duffel at her feet. The seat was softer than her mattress at home. I went to meet Rowan, she said. He closed the laptop, not dramatically, just carefully, setting it aside. He looked at her. He showed me something, she said. About you. About Milan. She blinked. You know what he showed me. I know what's publicly available, yes. His voice was even. No defensiveness in it, no particular concern. What do you want to know? Was it you? A pause. Long enough to be honest. The investigation named a holding company. The holding company was mine in a technical sense. The building was a problem that required resolving. He looked at her steadily. 14 people died in that building who used that building to move things across borders that I had told them to stop moving. When they didn't stop, I stopped them. The plane's engines were warming up, a low vibration running through the floor. You're telling me you had people killed, she said. I'm telling you the truth because you asked for it. He held her gaze. I have done things in my life that would make most people get off this plane. I'm not going to pretend otherwise and then let you find out later, because that's a cruelty I don't have any interest in. She should have gotten off the plane. Is my mother safe? She said instead. The people who paid for her surgery, is there anything attached to that money that could… No, he said. It came through a clean channel. There's nothing tied to it. Nobody is going to come for your mother. He paused. That's not how I operate. How do you operate? He was quiet for a moment. I have enemies. Significant ones. Some of them would target people adjacent to me if they thought it would produce a result. That's a real risk that I want you to understand clearly. He let that sit. But your mother is not adjacent to me, and I have the means to ensure she stays that way. The plane began to move. Aurora realized distantly that she had not told it to stop. She was sitting in this seat and the plane was taxiing and she was letting it happen. Where are we going? She said. New York. I have a residence there. You'll have your own floor, your own staff. You don't have to see me except when it's necessary. Define necessary. There are events, functions. My associates know I've been looking to formalize certain arrangements. A wife is a statement of stability in my world. It communicates things that words don't. He paused. In exchange, you'd have full access to resources that make your current financial situation unrecognizable. Your mother's ongoing care. Protection for yourself and anyone connected to you. He looked out the small window. The runway lights were moving past. And I will not ask anything of you that you don't consent to. Ever. She looked at his profile, the jaw scar catching the cabin light, the hands on the armrests, large, still, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that stillness was power. You're very calm about this, she said. About what? About the fact that I might still say no. We could land in New York and I could get a cab and you'd never see me again. You're acting like that possibility doesn't concern you. He looked back at her. Would it change anything if I acted otherwise? She considered this. No. Then why waste the energy? A small thing happened in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. I'm asking you, not telling you, not maneuvering you. You've already seen me pay for something with nothing required in return. You know I'm capable of that. He tilted his head slightly. If you decide you want to leave, I'll make sure you have what you need to do it cleanly. She turned that over, looked for the angle in it, couldn't find one that felt certain. The plane lifted. She was in the air before she'd made a decision she could name. New York, in the last days of December, felt like a city that had given everything it had to Christmas and was now running on fumes and stubbornness. The streets were still lit up, but the energy had changed, something post-celebration and slightly raw, the way people felt the morning after something they'd worked hard toward had passed. The residence was in a building that didn't advertise itself. No doorman in costume, no lobby chandelier, none of the obvious signals. Just a quiet street in the upper 60s, a door that opened with a code, an elevator that required a key. Valentino led her through it with the efficiency of someone who did not need to perform his surroundings because the surroundings already knew him. Her floor, the 12th, was larger than any apartment she'd ever been in. High ceilings, windows looking out over the park, furniture that managed to be expensive without being uncomfortable. A bedroom with a bed the size of her childhood bedroom. A bathroom with a bathtub she could actually lie down in. A kitchen stocked with things she hadn't seen in a grocery store in years. He showed her through it in under 4 minutes, pointed to the phone on the kitchen counter, said there was a direct line to the building's staff and his number was already programmed in, and then moved toward the elevator. "I'm on 17, he said. "I have calls until midnight. If you need anything..." "What happens now?" she said. "Practically. What does this actually look like day to day?" He stopped, turned. "You settle in. Get your bearings. We meet in a few days and discuss the legal arrangements. There would be an agreement, terms clearly written, your own attorney reviewing everything. Nothing moves forward until you're comfortable with the documentation. And the wedding. When you're ready, there's no immediate deadline." She looked at him. He was standing at the elevator with his hand on the doorframe, and he looked, for just a moment, in the imperfect lighting of the hallway, less like the architecture of a powerful man and more like a person. Just a tall, scarred, exhausted person standing in a doorway at the end of a long day. "You don't actually know me," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact she needed to say out loud. "No," he said. "Not yet." The elevator came. He stepped in. Valentino. She didn't know why she used his name. She hadn't used it until now. He looked at her. "Yes." "The building in Milan." She watched his face. Did any of them not know what they were part of? Did any of them just work there? The question landed in the silence between them, and she watched him decide whether to answer it honestly. "No," he said finally. "Every one of them knew." She nodded. The elevator doors closed. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went into the kitchen and found a box of pasta and a jar of tomato sauce, and she made herself dinner for the first time in 4 days, and she ate it standing at the kitchen counter looking out at the city lights. And she let the week happen to her all at once. The bus, the diner, the hospital waiting room, the plane, all of it. And when it was done moving through her, she was still standing, which she decided to count as something. Mate. 3 days passed in a specific kind of quiet. She slept more than she had in months. She called the hospital every morning and spoke to her mother every afternoon. Margaret's voice getting incrementally stronger each day, asking careful questions about where Aurora was and whether she was all right. Aurora said New York, and Margaret said why New York, and Aurora said she'd explain later. And Margaret said that phrase had never in her experience meant anything good. Valentino's attorney, a woman named Carla Rice, who wore glasses and spoke in precisely measured sentences and clearly found nothing unusual about drafting marriage agreements for men like Valentino, came to the 12th floor on the second day with a briefcase full of documents. The agreement was 61 pages. Aurora read every one of them. It took her 4 hours, and she made notes in the margins with a pen she found in the kitchen drawer. She had questions. Carla Rice answered them without flinching. She met with Valentino on the 3rd evening in a room on the 14th floor that seemed to function as an office. Dark wood, books that had actually been read, a desk with papers on it that looked like actual work rather than decoration. He was on the phone when she came in, said something brief and non-English into it and set it down. 17 questions, she said, setting the annotated agreement on his desk. He looked at it. "You wrote in the margins. It's easier to reference." He picked it up. Looked at the first page of notes. Something shifted in his expression. Quick, contained, almost amused. He set it down. Go. She went through all 17. He answered 14 directly, agreed to amend 2 of the clauses she'd flagged, and on the 17th, a question about her freedom of movement, specifically whether she could travel independently without notification, he was quiet for a moment. I'd want to know where you are, he said. Not permission, information. Why? Because there are people who would use you to get to me. They need to know you exist first, which takes time. But it's not unlimited time. He met her eyes. It's not control. It's logistics. It feels like control. I know it does. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to trust a distinction that you have no reason yet to trust. I'm aware of the ask. He paused. If I ever use that information to restrict you, you can walk. The agreement covers it. Clause 44. She'd read Clause 44. It did cover it. I'll amend 17 to reflect the distinction, Carla Rice said from the corner, without being invited into the conversation, the way lawyers did. Aurora looked at Valentino for a moment. He looked back. Okay, she said. He nodded. No triumph in it. No relief even. Just acknowledgement, the way you acknowledged weather. She signed the agreement the following morning. Chad. The wedding was small. Deliberately, specifically small. A civil ceremony in a judge's chambers on the 31st of December, with Carla Rice as witness and Valentino's driver, a man named Sergio, who had not spoken a word to Aurora in 4 days, standing at the back of the room with his hands clasped and his expression that of someone attending a very boring work meeting. Aurora wore a dress she'd bought in 3 hours from a store on Madison Avenue. Dark green, knee-length, the kind of dress that wasn't trying to be anything it wasn't. She'd bought it because she liked it and because it cost less than $200, which seemed important to her in a way she couldn't entirely articulate, some form of resistance she was maintaining with her wallet since she'd given ground everywhere else. Valentino wore a dark suit and a black tie, and when she came in, he looked at her for a second too long before he looked away, which she filed under information she wasn't ready to process. The judge was a small man named Harlan who had clearly done this before and had the professional neutrality of someone who considered the interior lives of the parties in front of him strictly none of his business. He moved through the required language with efficient respect. When he reached the relevant moment, Valentino turned to her. Up close, the closest she'd stood to him in any non-transactional way. The details were different. The eyes, which she'd clocked as dark, had something in them that she hadn't seen from a distance. Not warmth, exactly, but the possibility of it. Like a room where the fire has recently gone out and the warmth is still in the walls. She said what she was required to say. He said what he was required to say. His voice was the same as it always was. Level, low, unhurried. He put the ring on her finger without ceremony. A ring she hadn't seen before, set with a stone the color of deep water. She looked at it on her hand and it was the most foreign thing she'd ever felt. They signed the certificates. Outside the judge's chambers, in the hallway, she stood next to her new husband and looked at the door they'd just come through. Happy New Year, she said, because it was 11:43 on December 31st. Yes, he said. They took separate cars back to the building. She went to the 12th floor, and he went to the 17th. And she stood at her kitchen window watching the city count down to midnight. And when the fireworks started over the park, she pressed her hand flat against the glass and watched them color the sky. And she tried to locate herself in the sequence of events that had brought her here and couldn't quite do it. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize, not the area code for any place she'd ever lived. The text read, "Congratulations on your marriage, Mrs. DeLuca. My brother has terrible taste, but even he occasionally gets something right. We should meet." She read it twice. Then she screenshot it and called Valentino. He picked up on the first ring. "Someone just texted me," she said, "calling themselves your brother." A silence on the line, brief but absolute, the kind of silence that had a shape. "Don't respond to that," he said. "Who is he?" Another silence, this one longer. "His name is Lucian," Valentino said. And the way he said it, the specific flatness of it, the way all the controlled steadiness in his voice went tight on that single word, told her more than anything that followed could. "Should I be worried?" she said. Valentino looked out the window of his penthouse at the same fireworks she was watching from 12 floors below and he said nothing for long enough that the silence became its own answer. Then, "Don't leave the building tonight." "Valentino." "I'll explain in the morning." A pause. "Lock your door, Aurora." The line went dead. She stood at her window with the fireworks exploding over the park, and the stranger's text glowing on her screen and her new husband's voice still sitting in her ear. And for the first time since she'd gotten on that plane, she felt the true weight of what she had walked into. Not fear, exactly. Something worse. The particular cold clarity of understanding that the thing you have chosen is larger than you were told, wider than you imagined, and that somewhere in its perimeter there is a door you didn't know existed, and it has just been knocked on. She locked her door. She did not sleep. She didn't sleep, but she tried, which was its own kind of exhausting, lying in the dark with her eyes closed and her mind running hard laps around the same track. Lucienne. The name sat in her chest like a splinter, small and specific and deeply uncomfortable, the way Valentino had said it. The flatness, the tightness underneath the flatness. She'd spent enough time around people who controlled their reactions to recognize when the control itself was the tell. She got up at 5:30 because lying down had stopped being useful, made coffee, stood at the window while the city came gray and slow out of the dark, the park below still carrying the debris of last night's celebrations. Paper, abandoned bottles, the occasional scrap of something that had once been festive. New Year's Day. She was a married woman. She was standing in a kitchen that wasn't hers in a city she didn't belong to, married to a man she'd known for 11 days, and somewhere in the architecture of that man's life, there was a brother who had texted her at midnight to introduce himself. She read the text again. "My brother has terrible taste, but even he occasionally gets something right." Condescending. Deliberate. The specific tone of someone who wanted her to know they found her interesting before they wanted her to know anything else. She deleted it. Then, after a moment, undeleted it. Evidence was evidence. Valentino knocked on her door at 7. She knew it was him. The knock was like he was, unhurried, not loud, the kind of knock that didn't repeat itself because it assumed it would be answered. She opened the door. He looked like he hadn't slept either, which she noted with the detached precision of someone cataloging relevant information. Same suit, different shirt. The jaw tense. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from somewhere outside the building, which surprised her. The idea of him going out to a coffee shop, standing in a line, doing something that ordinary. He held one out. She took it. "Come up," he said. "I'll explain." The 17th floor was different from hers, less finished somehow, more lived in, more evidence of actual habitation. A desk covered in papers, a couch with a throw blanket pushed to one side, bookshelves that were working bookshelves, crammed and impractical, with things tucked horizontally on top of vertical rows. She looked at the books while he set down his coffee and pulled a chair to the center of the room, the way someone arranged things when they were preparing to talk about something they'd arranged before in their head. She sat on the couch. He sat in the chair. The city outside the windows was white with winter light. "Lucien is my younger brother," he said. "By 4 years. We were not raised together. Different circumstances. I won't go into the details. He came into my world when he was 22, and I let him in because he was family, and I had very few people I considered that." He paused, looked at his hands. "That was a mistake I've been managing for the past 8 years." Managing how? He wanted position, authority. I gave him what I could safely give him and kept him away from what I couldn't. He looked up. He didn't accept that. He built his own operations parallel to mine, using resources and connections that he accumulated because of the access I'd given him. When I found out 3 years ago, I cut him off. Took back what I could take back. The rest, he made a small, precise gesture. Became a problem. "He's your enemy," she said. "He's my brother who is also my enemy." He held her eyes, which is a specific category of dangerous because he knows things that actual enemies don't know. He knows how I think. He knows what I protect. He knows what I... A stop. Brief. He knows the architecture. And he texted me on our wedding night. Yes. So he knows about me. He's known about you since before you got on the plane. I have people watching certain things. So does he. When my people moved, his people saw. The muscle in his jaw worked once. I should have told you this before. I kept it because I didn't want to. I thought I had more time to manage it. Aurora looked at him. You thought you could fix it before it became my problem. Something moved in his expression, not quite discomfort. The specific look of a man who has been accurately described. Yes. That's not a partnership. No. He held her gaze. It's not. I'm telling you now. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. What does he want? He wants what he's always wanted. The operation. The full scope of it. Valentino's voice stayed level, but the effort behind the level was visible to her now. She'd had enough days to learn the difference between his natural stillness and his controlled stillness. This was controlled. He believes that if he destabilizes me enough, publicly, structurally, the people who currently align with me will recalculate. There are men who follow capability. If I appear to have lost mine, they move. And taking you apart through me is how he destabilizes you. The silence was the answer. How bad is it? She said. He doesn't have enough yet. That's why he reached out. He wants to see what you are to me before he decides how hard to push. He looked at her. How you respond to him matters. What you show him matters. What do I show him? Nothing, Valentino said. You show him nothing. You don't respond. You don't engage. He's going to come in person eventually, she said. You know that. A text is an opening move, not a strategy. Valentino looked at her for a moment. Yes. So me showing him nothing only works until he's in the same room. She set down her coffee. What happens then? A beat. 2. Then we navigate it, he said. Together. Which is why I'm telling you now instead of 3 months from now. She looked at him. He looked back. The morning light was coming through the windows at an angle that caught the scar on his jaw and made the lines of his face very clear. Is there anything else you're managing? She said. Any other pieces of your life that are actively dangerous that you've been planning to tell me when you ran out of time? He was quiet. Valentino, there's always something, he said. Not evasive, honest. The flat honesty of someone who has stopped pretending their world is simpler than it is. That's the nature of what I do. I don't have a clean life that I'm keeping messy areas away from. He paused. It's a structure under constant pressure from multiple points. I manage the pressure. Some of it I see coming, some I don't. I need to know the main ones, she said. Not everything. The main ones. The ones that are currently active. He studied her. Then he said, Lucien, a man named Dario Ferrante in the South who believes I owe him a debt I don't acknowledge. A situation in 3 months involving a set of agreements that are coming due and may not settle cleanly. He held up 3 fingers, one for each, and folded them as he named them. Those are the active ones. Which one is most likely to come through my door? Lucien, he said, without hesitation. She nodded. She picked up her coffee again. Okay. He watched her. Okay. I'm not going to pretend I'm not afraid of this, she said, but I made a choice and I'm not someone who unmakes choices when they get complicated. She looked at him steadily. I need you to not manage me. I need you to tell me things when they become relevant, not when you've run out of alternatives. That's the only way this works. Something shifted in his face. Small, real. Yes, he said. Good. She stood up. I'm going to shower and then I want to call my mother. After that, you can tell me what you need me to know about Lucien specifically. She walked to the elevator, had her hand on the door when he said her name. She looked back. I don't... He stopped. Tried again. People don't usually... Another stop. He looked for one unguarded second, like a man who had a thing to say and no practiced way to say it because he'd never needed the practice. Thank you, he said finally, for not running. She looked at him for a moment. Not yet, she said, and hit the elevator button. The first 2 weeks of January moved in a rhythm she hadn't expected. Not quiet. Valentino's world was never quiet. The phones ran constantly. People moved through the upper floors with the purposeful tension of people managing large and complicated things. But structured. She had space within it. He gave her that deliberately, and she could see the deliberateness, which she appreciated more than if it had been natural. She
she learned the building. She learned Sergio, who turned out not to be mute but simply conservative with words. He had 4 distinct one-syllable responses that covered most situations and deployed them with the precision of a man who had decided long ago that language was mostly inefficient. She learned Carla Rice, who worked out of the 14th floor and who, once Aurora had demonstrated she could read a legal document without needing things explained, began treating her with the particular respect lawyers reserve for clients who didn't waste their time. She did not learn Valentino. Not fully, but she learned the outline of him with more accuracy each day. The rhythm of his silences, the way his attention changed quality depending on what he was thinking, the small and involuntary things his face did when he was close to something he cared about and was trying not to show it. She caught him watching her 3 times in the first 2 weeks, in the way that people watch things they found genuinely surprising. She didn't mention it, she filed it. Her mother called every day. Margaret was recovering with the stubbornness she applied to everything, physical therapy proceeding at a pace her doctors described as remarkable, and that Aurora recognized as her mother simply refusing to be inconvenienced by her own body longer than necessary. She hadn't told Margaret about the marriage. She'd said she was working a new job. Margaret had said in that new job and with that new money, something didn't add up, and Aurora had said she'd explain in person, and Margaret had said that phrase again, and Aurora had laughed for the first time in 3 weeks. The call came on January 14th. She was in her kitchen, noon. She was eating lunch, actually cooking now, filling the hours with something physical, and her phone rang with the unsaved number. She knew before she answered. "You didn't write back," Lucien said. His voice was lighter than she'd expected, younger sounding, almost pleasant in the way that things were pleasant when they were working very hard at it. "I was hurt." "I don't respond to unknown numbers as a rule," she said. "Smart. My brother trained you fast." A pause. "Or maybe you came that way. I haven't decided yet." "What do you want?" "To meet you." Simple, easy, like a social call. "You're family now, technically. I think we should know each other." "Your brother would disagree." "My brother disagrees with most things I do. That's a him problem." She could hear him smiling through the phone. It was not a warm smile. She could tell the difference. "I'm not asking for anything complicated. Coffee, public place, an hour." Another pause. "I can be very helpful to you, Aurora, if you let me." "Helpful how?" "Information," he said. "Things about the man you married that he hasn't told you. Things you might want to know before you get any more comfortable in that building." She was quiet. The knife she'd been using sat on the cutting board. Her hand was very still. "You don't know what he hasn't told me," she said. "I know Valentino," Lucien said. "I know exactly what he tells people and exactly what he keeps. And I know that whatever he's told you about me, he hasn't told you the most important thing." His voice dropped, just slightly. Precision, not drama. "Ask him what happened to the last woman he brought into his life." The line went quiet. "Ask him," Lucien said again, gently, "and then call me back." He hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a long time. The food went cold on the counter. Outside, the park was bare and white under an overcast sky, and the city moved beneath it in its usual indifferent way. And she stood there with the phone in her hand and felt the specific cold of a thing that you've been told to know and now can't be told. She could dismiss it. That was an option. Lucien was her husband's enemy, which made him her enemy by extension, which made everything he said suspect by design. She knew that. She knew the mechanics of it clearly. And yet, she went upstairs at 4 in the afternoon. Valentino was in the office, on the phone. He held up one finger. A minute, and she sat in the chair across from his desk and waited. He finished the call in 3 minutes, set the phone down, looked at her, saw her face. "What happened?" he said. "Lucien called me." The stillness that came over him was the controlled kind. She knew it now. "What did he say?" "He wants to meet. Coffee, public place." She held his gaze. "And he told me to ask you what happened to the last woman you brought into your life." Silence. Complete. The kind of silence that confirmed the question was valid. She watched his face move through several things very quickly, all of them contained, all of them fighting to stay contained.
and settle into something flat and careful that was the most alarming thing she'd seen on him yet, because it meant he was deciding how to say something difficult. Her name was Mara, he said. Aurora waited. 3 years ago. She wasn't... He stopped, chose words with the precision of someone diffusing something. It wasn't what you and I have. It wasn't an arrangement. The pause was the longest she'd heard from him. I was not careful. I let her into spaces I don't let people. I thought that was the right thing to do. What happened to her? Lucien found out she mattered to me. His voice was completely flat now. He used her to extract information from my operation. She didn't know what she was giving him at first. He was careful about that, gradual about it. When I found out it had been going on for 4 months. He looked at the desk. I couldn't prove she knew what she was doing. She said she didn't. Did you believe her? I don't know. He looked up. I sent her away, relocated her, made sure she was safe and comfortable and completely away from my world. The muscle in his jaw. Lucien burned the house I put her in. The room was very quiet. She got out, he said. She was fine. She's been fine. I check. The flatness cracked just slightly. A fracture, not a break. But it told me what he would do, what he was willing to do, using people, burning things. He met her eyes directly. Which is why I needed someone who came with a different set of circumstances. Someone who wasn't vulnerable in the ways that Mara was. Someone with less sentimental exposure. Aurora absorbed this. You chose me, she said slowly, partly because you thought I'd be harder to use against you. Yes, because I don't love you. Because there's nothing between us yet that he could... He stopped. Yes, that was part of the calculation. She looked at him. He looked back. And in the space of that look, she saw something she hadn't seen from him before. Not guilt, which was a performative thing, but its structural equivalent. The expression of a man who has done a reasonable thing for defensible reasons and is currently watching those reasons look worse than they seemed when he made them. The arrangement, she said, my terms, the specificity of them, the way it was structured to feel like a transaction, helped establish the optics, yes. He didn't look away. If there's nothing between us, there's nothing for him to reach. She stood up, slowly, the way you stood up when your legs needed a moment to remember they worked. You used me as a shield, she said. I offered you something real in exchange. You used me as a shield, she said again. Not louder, flatter. The surgery, the protection. That was real, I believe that. But the shape of this, the specific shape, was designed to keep me at a distance that protected you. He was quiet. And it didn't work, she said, because Lucien already found out about me. He called me directly. He's already moved past whatever perimeter you designed. She picked up her phone from the arm of the chair. So the shape you built this in to protect yourself has already failed, and I'm still in it, and I don't have any of the information I would need to protect myself because you were managing me. Aurora! I'm not leaving. She said it before he could react to what might have been an exit coming. I told you I don't unmake decisions. I'm not leaving. She looked at him. But we need to be different from this point, completely different, because what you built won't survive him and you know it. He stood up, not fast, controlled, like everything. He came around the desk and stopped 6 feet from her because he understood somehow that 6 feet was the right distance, that coming closer would be wrong. What do you need? He said. Everything, she said. Every active thing, every vulnerability, every piece of him you know and haven't told me. She held his gaze. If I'm in this, I'm actually in it. Not the version you designed for safety. The real version. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she could see him deciding, not whether to trust her, she thought, but whether he was capable of it, whether that particular mechanism still worked. Sit down, he said. This will take a while. It took 3 hours. He talked, and she listened, and asked questions that were specific and unsentimental, and he answered all of them, and somewhere in the 3rd hour she understood that what she was being given was the thing he did not give people. Not because he'd decided she'd earned it, but because the alternative had run out of runway, and this was what was left. Lucien, she learned, was not just dangerous in the way that dangerous men were dangerous.
He was patient. He was systematic. He worked on timelines that stretched across years, building things slowly, and he understood the difference between winning and appearing to win. He had people inside Valentino's operation, not many, but placed well. He had connections in 3 cities that gave him access to information that should have been impossible to access. And he had, Valentino said, with the flat precision of someone reporting a fact they had reconciled themselves to long ago, a genuine personal hatred for his brother that was not strategic but foundational. "He blames me," Valentino said, "for the circumstances of his childhood. Some of what he blames me for is fair. I had more than he did. I knew about him before he knew about me, and I didn't—" He stopped. "I didn't do enough. I told myself I had reasons." "Did you?" "Yes." A pause. "They weren't good enough." She filed this. The way he said it, not deflecting, not minimizing, the specific weight of a person carrying something real. It was past 7 when she finally stood. The city outside was dark and fully lit, the winter evening sharp against the glass. "He's going to move soon," she said. "He didn't call me to set up a meeting he expected me to agree to. He called to tell me he could reach me, to put something in my head and see what I'd do with it." She looked at Valentino. "He wanted me to confront you." "I know. So he has something that relies on a specific reaction. He wants fracture." She pulled her coat from the back of the chair. "He's watching to see if he got one." And did he? She looked at him. The scar. The eyes that were not black up close, but a very dark brown with something in them she still hadn't fully named. "No," she said, "but he doesn't know that yet." She went back to her floor, ate the cold food she'd abandoned at lunch, sat at the kitchen table and thought very carefully about the shape of everything she'd been told. At 11:15, her phone buzzed. Not Lucian's number. A different unknown number. A New York area code. The text was a photograph. She opened it. It was her, standing in the vestibule of the Hartwell Road building on New Year's Eve. Taken from outside, Xiao. Through the window, from the parking lot, with a long lens. Clear enough that you could see her face, her coat, the folded paper in Rowan's hand. The caption beneath the photograph read, "He doesn't know you went to meet your ex-fiancé the morning of your wedding, does he?" A second text arrived 4 seconds later. "I wonder what he'd think. A man like Valentino, who trusts so carefully, who was burned once already." A third, "Come have coffee with me, Aurora. Tomorrow. I'll send an address. Come alone and this photograph stays between us. Bring anyone or tell my brother, and I send it to every person in his organization with a note about what it means." She sat with the phone. The kitchen light was too bright. Her hands were perfectly still. She thought about Mara, the burned house, the 4 months of information bleeding out before anyone saw it. She thought about Valentino's face saying she was fine. She's been fine, I check. The fracture in the flatness of it. She thought about what Lucien wanted from this meeting and whether there was a version of attending it that didn't end with her becoming the next thing used and discarded. She couldn't find one. She also couldn't find a version of telling Valentino that didn't confirm everything Lucien needed him to fear. That she was already compromised, already a liability, already the hole in the wall that the cold came through. She set the phone face down on the table. She pressed her hands flat on the surface and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, 4 counts each, the way she'd learned to breathe when things were very bad, and she needed her body to stay functional while her mind worked. The address arrived at 11:47, a coffee shop in Midtown. 10 a.m. Aurora looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and began to type. Not to Valentino, not to Lucien, but to a number she'd been given by Carla Rice on the second day, labeled only emergency use. She'd never used it. She'd assumed it was for legal emergencies. Now she looked at it and thought about what kind of emergency this qualified as, and decided it qualified as the kind. The emergency number rang twice before it picked up. No voice. Just open line, waiting. "This is Aurora DeLuca," she said. The name still felt like wearing someone else's coat. "I need to speak to whoever Carla Rice designated for non-legal emergencies, tonight." A pause. Then a man's voice, low and professional. "Hold." She held for 40 seconds. Then a different voice, older, clipped, the voice of someone who had been woken up and was pretending they hadn't been. Mrs. DeLuca, what's happened? I've received photographs and a contact demand from Lucian DeLuca. He wants a meeting tomorrow at 10. He's using the photographs as leverage. They're compromising in context, but not in fact. He's told me to come alone and not inform my husband. A silence, the kind that was full of rapid calculation. Don't delete the texts, the voice said. Don't respond to them. Don't go to that meeting. I know, she said. I need to know who else knows he contacted me. And I need to know in the next 10 minutes, because there is a version of this where my husband finds out from someone other than me, and that version is worse than all the others. Another pause. Give me 20 minutes. 10, she said. I'm telling him myself. I just need to know what I'm walking into first. The line was quiet for a moment. He has 2 people inside the building, the voice said. We've suspected. After tonight, we can confirm one of them was activated. There was a signal sent from the 14th floor at 9:40. Someone told Lucian you'd been given that emergency number. 14th floor, Carla's floor. Aurora looked at the phone in her hand. Not Rice, the voice said, reading the silence. Her assistant. We've had a flag on him for 6 weeks, but not enough to move. A pause. Now we have enough. So Lucien knows I called this number. Yes. Which means he knows I'm not coming to that meeting alone regardless of what I said. Yes. She absorbed this. He wanted me to call it, she said. The contact demand was never about the coffee. He needed me to react in a specific way to confirm something. We think so. What did he confirm? A pause longer than the others. That you matter to Valentino enough that the emergency infrastructure activates for you. The voice was careful now, deliberate. He's been trying to establish how much you're worth as leverage. Tonight was a measurement. Aurora sat very still in her bright kitchen at 11:58 on New Year's night and understood something she should have understood 3 hours earlier. This wasn't about the photograph. The photograph was a key, not a weapon. Something to unlock a specific door, to produce a specific movement, to generate data. Lucien didn't want to meet her. He wanted to know if Valentino would come for her if he took her. Thank you, she said, and hung up. She went upstairs without calling ahead. She knocked on 17 the way she knocked on things when there wasn't time for politeness. 3 times, sharp. He opened the door in 30 seconds. He'd changed into dark clothes, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. He looked at her face and stepped back immediately to let her in. She told him everything, all of it. The photograph, the text, the number, the call. What the voice had told her about the assistant on 14. She told it in order, without editorializing, watching his face move through each piece of information with the specific controlled fury of a man who is very good at not breaking things in front of people. When she finished, he was standing at the window with his back to her, one hand on the glass, looking out at the city. The assistant's name is Gregor, he said. He's been with Carla for 2 years. The voice on the phone said 6 weeks of flags. We were being careful. He turned around. His face was very still. The controlled kind, the dangerous kind, the kind she now knew to read as the outermost layer of something volcanic underneath. I should have moved faster. He would have found another way in. Yes. He looked at her. Are you all right? I'm not the one who should be asking that. I'm asking you. She looked back at him. I'm angry, she said. I'm angry that he could get a photograph of me, and I didn't see it happening. I'm angry that someone in this building has been watching me and reporting on me for weeks and I didn't know. She paused. I'm not frightened. I was, for about 10 minutes. Now I'm just angry. Something in his face shifted, something real. What do we do? She said. He looked at her for a moment. The same look she'd caught 3 times in 2 weeks, the one she hadn't named yet. Then he moved to the desk, picked up his phone, and began making calls. By 3 in the morning, the 14th floor had been quietly cleared. Gregor was gone. Aurora didn't ask how or to where. And Valentino didn't explain. Carla Rice arrived at 2:15 with a laptop and the expression of a woman who was furious in a way she was professionally containing, and sat up at the desk in the office and worked in a focused silence that Aurora found oddly steadying. Sergio materialized from somewhere and stood outside the door to the 17th floor without being asked, which told her that Sergio's 4 one-syllable responses were the surface presentation of a man who was considerably more than a driver. At 4 a.m.,
Valentino sat down across from her in the office and said, "He's going to move within 48 hours. Once he confirms the meeting won't happen, once he sees I know what he did, he loses the slow approach. He'll go direct." Direct meaning what? Meaning he takes something. His eyes were level. Or tries to. Me. Possibly. Or he moves on the operational side. Tries to trigger the Ferrante situation early, create multiple pressure points simultaneously, divide the response. He paused. The photograph was tonight's version of a message. The next message will be less subtle. She thought about this. You said he knows how you think. Yes. Does he know how you'd respond if something happened to me specifically? What you do? Valentino was quiet for a moment. He thinks he does. What does he think you'd do? Pull back, secure the perimeter, manage from a defensive position because that's what I did with Mara. He held her gaze. Protect and retreat. And what would you actually do? The pause before he answered was short, but it was there. Come for him directly, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The city outside was at its quietest, that specific 4 a.m. stillness that only existed in the gap between night people and morning people, and in it she could hear her own pulse, even and deliberate. Then we should let him think the first thing, she said, and do the second. The 48 hours were the most technically precise and emotionally exhausting period of Aurora's life, including the week her mother had been in surgery and the night her father had tried to sell her and the morning she'd gotten on a plane with 11 days of acquaintance and decided to call it a choice. Valentino moved her to a different floor. Not for safety, he explained, but for appearance. It needed to look like he was securing her, going defensive, pulling her closer to him in the protective way that Lucien expected. He needed Lucien's source, and there was still at least one in the building. They hadn't found all of them. To see the expected pattern and report it. She understood this. She agreed to it. She did not particularly enjoy being moved like a piece on a board, even a piece that had been consulted about the move, but she understood the mechanics of it, and mechanics she could work with. What she couldn't work with in those 48 hours was the space between moves, the waiting. She wasn't a person built for waiting. She was built for doing, for the physical occupation of problems, for the specific relief of action. She cleaned things that were already clean. She cooked food she didn't eat. She called her mother twice a day instead of once and had longer conversations, letting Margaret's steady voice be the thing that reminded her there was a world outside this building where things were ordinary and survivable. On the second afternoon, Valentino found her in the kitchen on the floor they'd moved her to, not the 12th, the 15th, closer to him without being the same floor, standing at the stove making soup she didn't need. He leaned in the doorway. He didn't say anything immediately. Waiting makes me insane, she said, without turning around. I know. How do you do it? You've been doing this your whole life. How do you just... She gestured with the spoon. Sit with it. Practice. He came into the kitchen and sat at the counter. And I'm not sitting with it. I'm working. There's a difference. What are you working on right now? Ferrante. The Ferrante situation is more connected to Lucien than I told you. I'm rewriting some agreements. He paused. And I'm thinking about the coffee shop. She looked up. What about it? He gave you an address. I know which one. I know the building layout, the exits, the street approach. He met her eyes. He chose it for a reason. It's a funnel. One main entrance, limited exit options, good sightlines from the buildings across the street. A pause. He wasn't planning to have coffee. She set down the spoon, fully turned around. He was planning to take me there. Yes. Flat. Certain. The photograph was never leverage. It was a lure. Come alone. Don't tell your husband. He knew you'd tell me. He knew that. He wanted the photograph to go through the emergency line because it confirmed your status to him, like we said. But the meeting address... He stopped. The meeting address was in case you came anyway. In case I was stupid enough to actually go alone. In case you were brave enough, he said. Which is different, and he knows the difference, and he was betting on it. She stared at him. He knows me well enough to bet on that, and he's never met me. He studies people. It's one of the things he's genuinely good at. Valentino looked at the counter. He studied you for 2 weeks before he made contact. The church meeting with Rowan. The fact that you took the photograph but didn't delete it.
The fact that you called the emergency line and told them you were going to tell me yourself. He paused. He built a model of you. A correct one, mostly. Mostly.
He thinks you're brave and practical and that you don't fully trust me yet.
A very brief pause.
He's right about two of those.
She looked at him. The afternoon light was flat and gray through the kitchen window.
Which two?
She said. He met her eyes and didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer.
It happened on the third day, not the second, not at the coffee shop, not in any of the places Valentino's people were watching. It happened the way intelligent attacks always happened, at the junction between preparation and assumption, in the gap that opened up because they'd been watching one set of doors and Lucien had come through a different wall entirely. Aurora was on the phone with her mother at 2 in the afternoon. She was standing at the window of the 15th floor, watching the park, which had become her unconscious orientation point in the building. Whenever she needed to think, she went to the window that faced the park. Margaret was telling her about the physical therapist, a young man named Dale, who apparently had the disposition of a golden retriever and the physical expectations of a military trainer, and Aurora was laughing, really laughing, the first time in days, when the door to the floor opened. She turned. The man in the doorway was not Sergio. He was not anyone she recognized. He was 40, maybe, with a forgettable face and a delivery company uniform that would have been convincing if she hadn't spent the last 3 days being told by Valentino exactly how unconvincing convincing things tended to be. She kept the phone at her ear. "Mom," she said, her voice completely level, "I'm going to call you back." "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. 20 minutes. She hung up. The man in the doorway looked at her. She looked back. He had his hands at his sides, relaxed, and she registered this as wrong because a real delivery person would be holding something. "Wrong floor," she said. "Mrs. DeLuca." He said it carefully, like a password. "I'm going to need you to come with me." "No." "I don't think—" I said no. She had 6 feet between herself and the kitchen counter where her phone was. She needed to get to the phone, get to the counter, get to the block of knives that she had not put there by accident. "Whatever you were told about how this would go, it's going to go differently." He moved. She moved faster than she expected to. Not bravery, pure adrenaline, her body responding before her mind caught up. She got to the counter, got her hand on the phone. He caught her arm from behind, pulled her back, and she did the thing Valentino had shown her 3 days ago in a 10-minute conversation she hadn't thought was practical instruction until this exact second. She drove her elbow backward into his solar plexus, and when he buckled, she wrenched her arm free and put the counter between them and hit the call button on Valentino's number. It rang once. "I have a problem on 15, she said, "right now." 30 seconds, he said. No pause, no question, like he'd been sitting by the phone. The man recovered faster than she'd expected. He came around the counter and she threw the phone at his face. Not to hurt him, to make him flinch, to buy the half second, and grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, which turned out to be a cast iron skillet, and held it in both hands like a woman who had grown up on a farm and understood that weight was weight, regardless of context. "Don't," she said. He looked at the skillet, looked at her face, made a calculation. The door to the floor opened and Sergio came through it like weather. Fast and total and final. 2 other men behind him she'd never seen. The man in the delivery uniform turned, and there was a brief, brutal, completely efficient 30 seconds of violence that she watched from behind the kitchen counter with the skillet still in her hands, and then it was over and the man was on the floor and Sergio was standing over him breathing through his nose, and one of the other men was already on a phone. Valentino came through the door 40 seconds after that. He looked at the man on the floor, at Sergio, at the room, then at Aurora, still behind the counter, still holding the skillet, her heart hammering so loudly she could feel it in her back teeth. He crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and took the skillet out of her hands, gently, deliberately, and set it on the counter, and then he stood in front of her and looked at her face with an intensity she hadn't felt from him before. "Did he touch you?" he said. He grabbed my arm. "I'm fine." Her voice was steady. She was extremely proud of that. "I'm fine." "Aurora." "I'm fine." She pressed her hands flat on the counter behind her. "He came through the door. I knew immediately. I got to the phone."
Valentino looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the man on the floor, and something in his face went very cold and very complete. "Get him up," he said to Sergio.
She didn't stay for what came next, not because she couldn't handle it, but because Valentino asked her, quietly and specifically, to go to 17 and stay there. And she understood the ask was both practical and about something else, that what he needed to do in the next 30 minutes was not something he wanted to do in front of her, and she was not yet certain whether that was protective of her or protective of himself. But either way, she went. She sat in his office on the 17th floor and drank water she didn't taste and breathed carefully and let the adrenaline process itself out of her system the way it needed to, shaking through her hands and then her arms and then gone. She thought about this man's face when he'd come through the door, the delivery uniform, Lucien's patience, 2 weeks of building, of measuring, of identifying the gap, and then this specific move designed to confirm the thing Lucien needed to confirm, that Valentino would go to war for her. Not a coffee shop, not a photograph. She was the trigger. She was sitting with that when Valentino came in. He closed the door behind him. He looked like he'd been somewhere difficult and come back. His hands were clean. She checked, and the cold had gone from his face, leaving something more complicated underneath. He sat in the chair across from her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "He sent one man," she said. "He wasn't trying to succeed," Valentino said. "He was trying to make me react." And I'm reacting. He looked at her steadily. "Lucien is in the city. He has been for 4 days. We know where. I've been waiting because moving on him here creates complications I'd rather avoid, but..." He stopped. "But he came into my building. He touched my..." A pause. The pause had a shape. "He touched you. And that's finished the calculation." She looked at him. "You're going to him. Tonight. Not alone." "No." He held her gaze. "But I want you somewhere safe while it happens. Not here. Here is too close to what's coming." She thought about this. "My mother's at Millhaven General. Private location, staffed. I can have it set up in 3 hours." He paused. "You'd go to her?" "Yes." She looked at him. "But I want to know what you're walking into, specifically, before you go." He told her. Lucien had a warehouse in the Brooklyn Industrial Corridor, a building that had been in the DeLuca Holdings 20 years ago and had changed hands twice since then, which meant Valentino knew every structural detail of it. He had 7 men there at minimum, 12 at maximum. Valentino would go with more. The objective was containment, Lucien alive if possible, because dead meant complications with the remaining structure, and alive meant manageable. "He knows you're coming," she said. "Yes." "He wants you to come." "Yes." Valentino was very still. "He's been engineering this meeting since before I brought you here. The only variable he didn't fully plan for is you." "Me? You didn't run. You didn't fracture. You threw a pan at my guy's head and held a skillet and called me." Something moved in his face, real and brief and then contained. "He built his model of what you'd do, and you did something else." She absorbed this. Outside the windows, the city was going dark, the late afternoon light draining fast out of a winter sky. "Come back," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not saying it as a request," she said. "I'm saying it as a condition. Come back." He held her gaze for a long moment, long enough that she could see the thing she'd been unable to name moving close to the surface of him, the thing that had been in his eyes 3 times in 2 weeks, clearer now, almost fully legible. "Yes," he said. The car came at 6. Sergio drove her. She'd stopped being surprised by the things Sergio turned out to be capable of. Through the darkening city to a private facility in Westchester that was clean and warm and staffed by 2 people who were courteous and said nothing unnecessary. Her mother was there by 8, transferred from Millhaven General in an ambulance that had been arranged with the kind of speed that money and authority produced when they acted together. Margaret looked at the room, at the staff, at her daughter. "New job," she said. "I'll explain everything," Aurora said. Margaret looked at her. "You look like someone who's been in a fight." "I'm fine." "You have the same face you had when you were 11 and you fell out of the apple tree and told me you were fine when your arm was clearly broken."
Margaret's eyes were sharp and steady. Who are you married to? Aurora sat on the edge of her mother's bed. Outside, the Westchester evening was quiet and dark and completely nothing like the city. His name is Valentino, she said. She stopped, started again. He's complicated. Do you trust him? She thought about it, honestly, carefully, the way the question deserved. More than I thought I would, she said. More than I planned to. Margaret looked at her for a long moment with the eyes that had always seen through whatever Aurora constructed in front of her feelings. That's not an answer, Margaret said. That's a woman who doesn't want to know her own answer yet. Aurora looked at the window. Her phone was in her hand, turned over, the screen dark. She'd had it on silent for 6 hours. She told herself she wasn't watching it because there was nothing to watch yet. That wasn't entirely true. At 11:43 p.m., it lit up. A text from Valentino's number. 3 words. She looked at them, read them twice. Then she put the phone against her chest and breathed. Down the hall, her mother was sleeping. The facility was quiet. Somewhere on the other side of the city, in an industrial corridor where the lights were bad, and the buildings had histories that didn't appear in any public record. Whatever had begun with a night bus and a cup of cold coffee and a woman standing in the snow without her boots was either finishing or changing into something none of them had planned for. The text said, "We need to talk. Not I'm fine. Not it's done. Not come home. We need to talk." She stared at those 3 words and understood they were the most dangerous thing he'd sent her since the night she'd gotten on the plane. And not because they meant something had gone wrong, but because they meant something had. She called him back. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been holding the phone, which meant the 3 words had been chosen deliberately. A leash, not a message. Something to pull her toward him at a controlled distance. "You're alive," she said. "Yes." "Are you hurt?" A pause. "Some." She absorbed the specific weight of some. "How bad is some?" "I've had worse." His voice was different. Not the controlled stillness she knew, not the flat professional register. Something raw underneath it, stripped of a layer. "Aurora, there's something I need to tell you, not on the phone." "Then tell me where you are." He gave her an address. Not the building on the upper 60s. A different address, somewhere in lower Manhattan. She wrote it on the back of a receipt from her coat pocket with a pen borrowed from the nurse's station, tore it off, told her mother she'd be back by morning, and walked out into the Westchester night where Sergio was standing by the car like he'd known she was coming before she did. "You knew he'd call," she said. Sergio looked at her. "Yes," he said. 1 syllable. But the way he said it, something in it that wasn't quite acknowledgement, closer to relief. She got in the car. The address was a building in Tribeca that looked like nothing from the outside. Older, commercial, the kind of building that had been 3 other things before it became whatever it was now. Sergio brought her to a side entrance, a freight elevator, a hallway with industrial lighting that buzzed faintly at one end. A door. She knocked. He opened it himself, which surprised her. She'd expected Sergio's counterpart on the other side. Instead, it was Valentino, in the doorway, in a dark shirt with the left sleeve cut away and a bandage covering his forearm from wrist to elbow that was white on the edges and not white in the center. His face had a cut above the right eyebrow that had been closed with 3 small strips of tape. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there this morning, and a stillness about him that was different from his usual stillness, less controlled, more exhausted. The stillness of a man who had spent everything he had and was running on the structural memory of composure. She looked at the bandage. "That's not some." "It's not nothing," he allowed. She walked past him into the room. It was a large space, sparse, functional, the kind of place kept ready for use rather than for living. A table, chairs, a couch, medical supplies on the table that had clearly been used recently. 2 men she didn't know sitting at the far end of the room who stood when she came in, and then, at a look from Valentino, left through another door. She turned around. He was still standing at the entrance, watching her with that look she'd finally named sometime in the last 48 hours. Not during the crisis, but in the moments between the crisis, when the mechanics of fear had cleared enough for her to see what was underneath them. The look was the look of a man for whom the world had, at some point, become comprehensively predictable in its disappointments, and who had encountered something he could not predict and did not know yet what to do with that. "Sit down," she said. "You're listing slightly to the left." "I'm not." "You are. Sit down." He sat. She pulled a chair to face him, close, and looked at the bandage. "What happened?" "Lucien is in custody." He said it directly, no preamble. "Not mine. Federal. The situation was more complicated than I anticipated. There were federal agents already in the building when we arrived. Someone gave them the location." A pause. "Not someone on my side." "Lucien's own people gave him up. One of them, a man named Price, who had been working for Lucien for 6 years and had apparently been working against him for the last 2. Valentino looked at his hands. "Price contacted federal investigators 8 months ago. The warehouse was a controlled environment. They were waiting for Lucien to make a move large enough to justify the arrest. He stopped. "Tonight qualified." She sat with this. "So when you walked in, we walked into a federal operation that we were not aware of, which is a problem of its own kind." A brief, grim, almost smile. "Not the first time. We managed the situation. There were conversations. Certain understandings were reached." He met her eyes. "Lucien is in federal custody. He will not be released. The evidence Price provided is substantial enough that there is no version of this that ends with Lucien free. And the federal situation, the understandings, are handled." He held her gaze. "My exposure is managed. It costs something, but it's managed." She nodded. She could feel him holding something back. Not the deceptive kind of holding back, the kind that came before something difficult. She waited. "He talked," Valentino said, "before the federal agents took him. There was a period, in the building, when it was just the two of us." He looked at the bandage on his arm. "The cut is from him. I want you to know I did what was necessary to end it, and not more than that." "I believe you." "You shouldn't take that on faith." "I'm not taking it on faith," she said. "I'm taking it on evidence. You've had 3 months of opportunities to be a different kind of person, and you've been consistent." She held his eyes. "What did he say?" "Before." A long pause, the longest she'd heard from him. "He told me why he targeted you specifically," Valentino said. "Not just as leverage, the specific reason." He looked at her with an expression that was so stripped of its usual architecture that she almost didn't recognize it. Open, raw, the face of a man who hadn't shown a room this much of the inside of himself in a very long time. He said, "He told me that he chose you because he'd watched me for 2 weeks watching you, in Millhaven. He was there." A beat. "I didn't know he was there. But he followed me because he'd had information I was moving on some personal matter, the surgery. He'd picked that up through Gregor. And he went to see. And he saw me with you at the diner and at the hospital. And he said..." Valentino stopped, breathed. "He said he'd never seen me look at anyone the way I looked at you when you didn't know I was looking." The room was very quiet. "He said it was the easiest vulnerability he'd ever found," Valentino said. "Because I didn't even know it was there." Aurora looked at him, at the tape on his eyebrow and the bandage on his arm and the exhaustion that had worked itself all the way down into the bones of his face, and she felt something move in her chest that she'd been carefully not naming for 6 weeks, the way you didn't name a thing you weren't sure you were ready to keep. "Valentino," she said. "I know," he said. "I know what I said at the beginning. I know how I structured it. I know I told you the arrangement was about function, and I know I told you I chose you partly for strategic reasons." He looked at her. "Those things were true when I said them, and somewhere between the diner in Millhaven and tonight they became less true. And I didn't tell you when it changed because I didn't..." He stopped. The specific stop of a man hitting the edge of his vocabulary for this particular territory. "I don't have a practice for this," he said. "I don't have a system for it." "I know," she said. "I put you in danger. What I feel put you in danger. Lucien found it before I admitted it existed, and he used it. And you had a man come through your door and you had to..." His voice had changed. The rawness had deepened. "You should be furious." "I am," she said. "And I'll be furious about it properly when I've slept." She looked at him. But you came back. You told me you would, and you did. And right now, that's the most important fact.
He looked at her for a moment, long, searching, the look of someone who has been told something they believe and don't know what to do with their belief.
I need to tell you one more thing, he said. She waited.
Lucien said something else.
He said, a pause. Careful. He said that when I was a child, before we were separated, I used to follow our mother to a particular street, a street in a small town in western Pennsylvania. She had family there. We went twice, maybe 3 times, when I was very young. He met her eyes. He found this out when he was building his file on my history. He thought it was useful information about vulnerability, about origins. He held her gaze steadily. He mentioned the town, Millhaven.
The word landed in the room and sat there. Aurora's hands were very still in her lap.
You were in Millhaven as a child, she said. Once or twice, very young. I don't have clear memories of it. How young? 7, 8? She looked at him. Something was moving in the back of her mind, not fully formed yet, a shape in fog. A child with a wolf tattoo, she said slowly, on his wrist. Valentino's expression shifted.
My mother had it, he said.
A small tattoo. A wolf. It was a family thing, a marking. She put a temporary one on my wrist the last time we traveled. I was 7. He looked at his wrist, the right one, bare now, and then at her. How do you know about that? She was very quiet. The creek behind her childhood house, frozen in winter, running brown and fast in spring. The afternoon she'd fallen in, October, the water cold enough to stop her breathing. And the boy who'd come out of nowhere, who'd pulled her out by both arms and half dragged her to the bank and crouched over her until she coughed up the water and breathed again. The boy with dark eyes and a wolf on his wrist drawn in what she'd thought was marker. Who'd said nothing when she'd tried to ask his name, just looked at her for a long moment with an expression she'd spent 20 years misremembering as Rowan Mercer's face, because Rowan had been there too, standing 10 feet back, and it had been easier to assign the hero to the person she knew. She had told herself that story for so long. The boy who saved me was Rowan. Rowan, who I knew. Rowan, who was there. Except Rowan had been 10 feet back, and the one who'd come into the water had been a stranger, and she'd looked at the wrong face for 20 years because the right face had disappeared before she'd finished catching her breath. The creek, she said. Her voice came out strange, compressed, like something being squeezed through a narrow opening. Behind the farmhouses on Aldrin Road, October. I fell in. Valentino went completely still. You were 7, she said. 8. He said it very quietly. I was 8. You pulled me out. The silence that followed was the most complete silence she'd experienced in a life that had contained significant silences. It was the silence of 2 people sitting across from each other in a room in Lower Manhattan at 2 a.m. and understanding simultaneously that the distance between them was 20 years and 11 days, and no distance at all. I didn't remember you, he said. Specifically, I remembered the creek. I remembered a girl. He looked at her. When I found you in Millhaven, I told myself it was recognition of a type, someone who reminded me of something. I do that. I find patterns. He stopped. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know it was you, she said. I gave the memory someone else's face. Rowan's. He was there. It was easier. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs. He let me, for years. He let me believe it because it was useful to him. Valentino was looking at her with the expression she had no name for because she had never seen it on any face before. Something enormous and specific and entirely uncontrolled, the look of a man for whom the ground has shifted under every room he's ever stood in. I looked for you, he said. After, when we left, I asked my mother about the town, about the family there. She said we wouldn't go back. He looked at his hands. I was 8. I didn't have the resources to find one girl in one town. I know. I've thought about it. Over the years, not often, but it was... He stopped. It was the one thing I did that felt unambiguously right. Pulling someone out of cold water, no calculation, no consequence, just right. She looked at him.
The tape on his eyebrow, the bandage, the exhaustion, and beneath the exhaustion, something else. Something that had been there since Millhaven and that she'd been watching develop without being able to name it because she hadn't had the final piece. She stood up. She crossed the small distance between the chairs and sat on the edge of the table in front of him, close, and she took his face in both hands the way you held something you were finally ready to look at directly. And she looked. He went very still. Not the controlled kind. The kind that happened when something reached past every mechanism of control and got to the real thing underneath. "You came back," she said again. Quieter this time. Different weight. "I told you I would." "Yes." She looked at him. "You did." She kissed him. Not the way people kissed in movies, not the releasing of everything at once. Careful, real. The way you put your hand on something you weren't sure could hold weight and found that it could. He kissed her back, and his hands came up and held her face like she was something he was extremely careful not to break. And he kissed her the way a man kissed something he had not expected and had not prepared for and was not even slightly composed about. When she pulled back, she was still holding his face. His eyes were closed for a second. When he opened them, they were dark and clear and fully present. None of the management, none of the architecture. Just him. "We're going to have a lot to figure out," she said. "Yes." "Your world doesn't get simpler." "No." "I'm not Mara," she said. "I'm not going to be managed away from things. If I'm in this, I'm in all of it." "I know." He looked at her. "I know who you are." "You've known me for 6 weeks. I've known you for 20 years, he said. "The details are new." She laughed. It came out rough and slightly broken the way laughs came out when you'd been clenching your jaw for 3 days. But it was real, completely real, and she felt his thumb move against her cheek in response to it. The involuntary kind of touch, not the deliberate kind. She sat back, put her hands in her lap. Let the room be what it was for a moment. 2 people at the end of something enormous, in a sparse room in lower Manhattan, both of them battered in different ways, both of them on the other side of something they hadn't fully mapped yet. "My mother is going to have questions," she said. "I expect so. She's going to ask me who you are and what you do, and I'm going to have to tell her something." "Tell her the truth," he said. "She sounds like a woman who can handle truth." "She raised me," Aurora said. "So, yes." Grimmat. They stayed in that building until dawn, not because there was nowhere else to go, but because the outside world had a texture to it that neither of them was ready for yet. The federal implications, the operational aftermath, the structural work of rebuilding things that Lucien's 3 years of patient damage had worn down. All of that was real and waiting and would require significant, specific, unglamorous work in the days ahead. But dawn was still 2 hours away, and in that building, the work was tomorrow's problem. She slept on the couch for 3 hours. When she woke, he was at the table working. Papers, his laptop, the phone muted, but its screen showing a steady stream of messages he was scrolling through with the economical focus of someone triaging. He looked up when she sat up. "Sorry," she said, because she'd been using the only horizontal surface. "Don't apologize." He pushed a cup of coffee across the table, still warm, which meant he'd made it while watching her sleep, which she chose not to examine too closely. "Sergio is downstairs when you're ready." She sat up properly, looked at the window where the city was beginning to lighten, the sky going from black to that particular dark blue that preceded everything. "Lucien," she said, "what happens now? With him?" "Federal process. It will take time. There are things that will come out in the proceedings that will require responses on my end. Legal, structural." He looked at her. "Some of it will be public." "I know. Your name may appear in things. Our marriage may become Valentino." She held his eyes. "I know. I understood what I was choosing when I signed those papers." She paused. "I'd like to say I understood completely, but I'm choosing it again right now, with more information, which should count for more." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "it counts for more." "What about Ferrante? The southern situation?" "That gets more complicated now." Lucien had been feeding Ferrante information, incorrect information, designed to inflame the debt question. Now that Lucien is contained, there's a possibility of renegotiation. Carla is already drafting an approach. A pause. It will take months. It won't be clean, but it's workable. And Gregor, the assistant, dealt with. Flat. She didn't ask. And the people on 14, any others Lucien had inside.
We're working through it. He held her gaze.
This is what the next several months looks like, probably longer.
Cleaning what was compromised, rebuilding what was damaged, managing the federal situation from a careful distance. He paused. I know it's not easy, she said. I didn't sign up for easy. No, he said. You didn't. The almost smile, real, small, the one that happened when she'd surprised him. You signed up for functional, with appropriate caveats.
17 of them. She laughed again, less broken this time. Oh, she went to her mother at 8 in the morning. Sergio drove her to Westchester through a city that was just beginning its day, the streets carrying the particular quiet energy of early morning, and she sat in the back seat and looked out the window and let the last 6 weeks reorganize themselves in her memory into a sequence that made sense as a life rather than as a series of emergencies. Margaret was awake when she arrived, sitting up in bed with reading glasses on and a novel face down in her lap, and the physical therapist's notes on the nightstand, which she'd been studying with the focus of someone intent on doing everything right the first time. Aurora sat in the chair beside the bed, took her mother's hand, looked at her, the color coming back into her face, the wrists less thin than they'd been in December, the eyes the same as they'd always been. You look different, Margaret said. I'm tired. Not that kind of different. Her mother looked at her. Something settled. Aurora thought about this. Something resolved, she said. It's not the same as settled. Close enough. Margaret squeezed her hand. The young man who arranged all this. Your husband. His name is Valentino. I know his name. Carla Rice introduced herself last night when they brought me here, and she is a very competent woman who manages a great deal by saying very little, which tells me something about who she works for. A pause. What does he do? Aurora looked at her mother, at the eyes that had seen through every construction she'd ever built. He manages things, she said. Significant things, some of which are not entirely above consideration. She paused. He's dangerous in some contexts. He's also the person who paid for your surgery without asking for anything back, who sent the flowers, who came back when I told him to. She held her mother's gaze. He's complicated. I'm not going to tell you he isn't. Is he good to you? He's honest with me, she said, which is what I needed more than good. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Bring him to meet me. I will. Soon. Yes. Margaret settled back against her pillows. And this business is done? Whatever it was that had you sleeping 3 hours on a couch in Manhattan. The acute part is done. She held her mother's hand. There's work ahead, but the worst of it is done. Good. Her mother picked up the novel again. Then go home and sleep, Aurora. You look terrible. He came to Westchester 4 days later. She hadn't asked him to come at any particular time, had just told him when Margaret was ready for visitors, which Margaret had communicated by putting on the good robe and the reading glasses and positioning herself at the room's small table rather than in the bed, which was her particular way of indicating she intended to be taken seriously. Valentino arrived with Sergio and then sent Sergio to wait outside, which was the right instinct. He came through the door of the room, and Aurora watched him make the adjustment she'd watched him make in her father's kitchen 6 weeks ago. The read, the recalibration, the specific attention he brought to unfamiliar rooms, and she watched him take in Margaret, the eyes, the posture, the quality of her silence. He stopped a proper distance from the table and inclined his head slightly. Not a bow, just acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of someone who understood they were being assessed and found this reasonable. Mrs. Hale, he said. Sit down, Margaret said. She pointed to the chair across from her. Aurora says you're complicated. Yes, he said. He sat down. She also says you're honest. I try to be. Why did you pay for my surgery? He looked at her mother steadily. Because it needed paying for and I had the means. And Aurora had nothing to do with it at that point. He held her gaze. It was just the right thing to do. Some situations are simple. Margaret looked at him for a long time. The way she looked at things she was deciding about. Thorough, unsentimental. You're going to hurt her eventually, she said, not on purpose. But a man who does what you do and lives how you live is going to bring difficult things into her life. Yes. And you know that. Yes. And you're here anyway. I'm here because she chose to be here, he said. And because I would like... He stopped. The pause was not strategic. It was the pause of a man choosing words for something he didn't have practiced language for. I would like to do right by her, as a practice, for whatever time I'm given. Margaret looked at him. Then she looked at Aurora, who was standing at the edge of the room watching the two most honest people she knew sit across from each other and tell the truth. He'll do, Margaret said to Aurora. Aurora pressed her lips together around a smile. High praise, Valentino said very quietly. The highest I give, Margaret said, and picked up her novel. But the weeks that followed were not simple. She had promised herself she wouldn't perform the aftermath as simpler than it was, and she kept that promise. The federal situation was managed with the precise, sustained effort of people who knew how to manage federal situations. Carla leading a team that worked 12-hour days for 6 weeks, navigating the distance between what was being investigated and what could be attributed, keeping Valentino's exposure to a manageable level without making any promises that couldn't be kept. It cost money and time and several relationships that had to be rebuilt from different foundations. And there were 3 weeks in February when the outcome was genuinely uncertain, and Aurora sat with that uncertainty without pretending it away, and found that she could. Lucian's proceedings moved slowly, the way federal proceedings moved. He would be in the system for years before anything resolved. He sent no messages. He made no further moves. He was, for the first time in 8 years, genuinely contained. Ferrante took 4 months of negotiation and 2 in-person meetings that Valentino came home from looking like he'd been in a room with something radioactive. But by April, an agreement was signed that Carla described as durable and Valentino described as survivable, which Aurora had come to understand were the same category in his world. Gregor's absence was filled by a woman named Jo, who had been with the building's security apparatus for 3 years, and who, Carla said, had been flagged twice for promotion and overlooked twice for reasons that were now being rectified. Jo had 6 words in her vocabulary compared to Sergio's 4, and the two of them occasionally stood in hallways and had what Aurora privately thought of as minimalist conversations that communicated more than most people managed in paragraphs. Her mother went home to Millhaven in March. Aurora flew with her and spent 4 days in the house she'd grown up surviving and stood in the kitchen with the herb pots on the windowsill and the frozen creek visible through the back window and felt the distance between who she'd been in December and who she was now as something physical. Not loss, not grief, just the particular weight of changed geography. She walked to the creek one afternoon. It was running now, the ice long gone, brown and fast with snowmelt. She stood on the bank and looked at the place where she'd gone in 26 years ago and where a boy with dark eyes and a wolf on his wrist had pulled her out and then disappeared. And she stayed there until the cold got into her coat, and then she went back to the house. Valentino called while she was making dinner for Margaret. "How is she?" he said. "Good. Dale, the physical therapist, has her doing things I couldn't do at 30. And you?" "I'm good." She looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. "I went to the creek today." A pause. "Yes." "It's just a creek," she said. "It's small. I can't believe I almost drowned in it." "You were 8. You were 2. It seemed very large to me," he said. "The cold." She leaned against the counter. Outside, the light was going gold and low over the fields, the kind of Pennsylvania late afternoon light that didn't exist anywhere else she'd been. "I used to think the story of that day was about being saved," she said. "The big version. Someone coming for you when you needed it. I was looking for that person my whole life and I kept finding the wrong ones." "Aurora, let me finish." She held the phone and looked at the creek through the window. "I think the actual story is smaller. It's about a boy who didn't think about it, who just went into the water because that was the thing that needed doing and it was in front of him." She paused. "That's what you've been doing. From the diner to the surgery to coming back when I asked you to. Not the big version, just the thing that needed doing." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not a good man," he said, "in the broad account. I know. I want to be—" He stopped.
I want to be what you need me to be. I'm aware that's not the same thing. No, she said, it's not. She watched the light fade over the fields. But it's something. It's a direction. She let the silence rest for a moment. Come this weekend, meet my town. Let me show you the creek. A pause, long enough to be real. Yes, he said. He came on Saturday. He drove up from Pittsburgh, his own car, not the town car, not Sergio, in a dark green vehicle that was understated enough to pass without comment on a Millhaven street. He wore clothes she'd never seen on him, dark jeans, a coat that was warm rather than deliberate. He looked for the first time in her experience of him, like a man rather than a structure. He met her at the end of the driveway. She looked at him in the gray Pennsylvania morning, in front of the house she'd grown up in, and she thought about the diner at 3 a.m. and the hospital waiting room and the plane lifting and the wedding in a judge's chambers and the man in the delivery uniform and the 3 words on the phone and his face when she'd held it in the room in Tribeca. You look different here, she said. Less like what I am, he said. More like who you are. He looked at her, the scar, the eyes. Come in, she said. My mother made coffee and she'll be insulted if you don't drink it. She turned toward the house. He fell into step beside her, and at the threshold she felt his hand, brief, deliberate, touch the small of her back. Not possessive, not a statement, just present, just the particular warmth of someone choosing to be close. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't need to. They went inside. Later, after coffee and Margaret's thorough and precise interrogation that Valentino passed with the same direct economy he'd brought to the first meeting, after Aurora had walked him through the town that had made her and shown him the diner and the hardware store and the Christmas lights that were still mostly missing their bulbs and completely unreplaced, Millhaven persevering in its unsentimental way, she brought him to the creek. It was late afternoon. The light was the golden low kind again, cutting sideways through the bare trees along the bank, turning the running water amber where it caught. He stood on the bank and looked at it. She stood beside him. Small, he said. Told you. He was quiet for a moment. I remember standing here, he said. Not this exact bank, but close. The sound. He looked down at the water. I remember thinking I should do something about the girl in the water before I thought about whether I was capable of it. 8-year-old logic. Best logic I've ever used, he said. She looked at the creek, at the light on the water, at the bare trees and the dead grass and the February cold that still clung to the bank even with the ice gone. The most ordinary place she knew, the place she'd been trying to leave most of her life. I don't know what we're going to look like, she said, long term. I don't know how your world and everything it requires is going to coexist with the parts of my life that have nothing to do with it. I don't know if we're going to be good at this. No, he said, that doesn't scare me as much as it should. No, he said again, the same word, different weight. She looked at him. He was looking at the creek still, and in the sideways light his profile was very clear. The jaw scar, the eyebrow tape still there from 5 days ago, the lines that had come from a life that had not been easy on the face it was lived behind. I'm glad it was you, she said. The boy at the creek. I'm glad when I finally got the face right, it was yours. He turned to look at her. His expression was unguarded in a way she had not seen it in a room full of other people, only in private, only in the specific territory between them that had been built from the beginning on something more honest than convenience. He put his arm around her. She let herself lean into him. The cold was real and the creek ran past, and somewhere in the house behind them, her mother was alive and well and reading something with her good glasses on, and the town went on in its unsentimental way around them, and it wasn't a perfect version of anything. It was just real. It was just them. And for the first time since she'd stood in the snow outside her father's house in December with no boots and nowhere to go, Aurora Hale, who had been sold and survived it, who had chosen and survived it, who'd been afraid and done the thing anyway, felt something uncurl in her chest that she recognized as the opposite of bracing for impact. She didn't have a cleaner word for it than that. She didn't need one. The creek ran past, and the light went golden low and finally dark, and they stayed on the bank until the cold made staying impractical, and then they went inside.